Have you ever wondered why the strongest man, the most confident one in the room, often hides the deepest hunger behind his eyes? He will laugh, he will lead, he will charm, but beneath the armor of his masculinity lies a craving so profound that he dares not give it a name. For to admit it would strip him bare, revealing not only his desire, but also his shame. Jung understood this, that every man carries in his unconscious a silent plea for the feminine, not as possession, not as conquest, but as a mirror to his own forgotten soul. And yet, to reveal this truth would feel like surrender, a surrender he has been trained his entire life to resist. It is not power he secretly longs for, nor the validation of applause, nor even the fleeting intoxication of desire. What men secretly crave, though they bury it beneath pride and ego, is to be fully seen. To have a woman look into his essence, past the masks, past the performance, past the shadow he projects to the world, and recognize the trembling human soul he himself is too afraid to meet. He will never say it aloud, because to confess the need to be seen feels like weakness. Yet the paradox is this: the stronger the man pretends to be, the more desperate his hidden yearning becomes. He seeks a sanctuary, though he cloaks it in silence. He dreams of a feminine presence that does not judge or demand, but one that anchors him in her stillness. He craves not just touch, but resonance. The kind of resonance that quiets his restless mind, that dissolves the war within himself. You might think he is chasing admiration, and indeed he does, but admiration is merely the counterfeit currency of what he truly desires. What he longs for is a gaze that does not waver when his shadow rises, a presence that accepts the paradox of his strength and his fragility, his dominance and his helplessness. Most women never realize this because men rarely confess it. And when you do notice, you may dismiss it as weakness, or worse, you may try to exploit it. But the woman who understands this hidden craving becomes unforgettable. She does not give him what he consciously demands. She embodies what his unconscious secretly yearns for. She becomes, in Jung's words, the anima, his lost inner feminine, come to life before him. And though he will never admit it, though he may even resist her, his soul aches to merge with that reflection. But here lies the danger. His need is primal, yet he fears it more than anything. To admit it would shatter the myth of masculine invulnerability. So he turns away, pretends indifference, sometimes even mocks the very qualities he cannot live without. And yet, when she finally walks away, when she no longer offers that silent, grounding presence, regret floods him like a storm. He realizes too late that he was not craving conquest, nor beauty alone, but the soul recognition only a deeply grounded feminine energy can give. This is why detachment cuts him so sharply, because in her withdrawal, he loses not merely a companion, but the mirror of his hidden self. He feels hollow, though he cannot explain why. He tells himself it was just attraction, or timing, or pride. But deep down, his body knows the truth. He lost the sanctuary of being seen without armor, and once a man has felt that, no superficial victory can satisfy him again. You may not realize it, but when you embody your own wholeness, when you refuse to bend yourself into his projections, you are already giving him what he craves most. You show him that a woman's worth is not to complete him, but to reflect him. Not to soothe his ego, but to remind him of his soul. And though he may never admit this hunger, though he may laugh it away or drown it in distractions, you will see it in his silence, in the way his eyes linger when you detach. He craves it, fears it, and mourns it when it is gone. And here is the paradox that Jung, Seneca, and even the Stoics understood. The man who cannot face his own shadow will always chase illusions, but the woman who knows her own depth becomes the catalyst for his awakening. Yet she does not wait. She does not beg. She does not diminish her light to keep him comfortable, for it is in her refusal to betray herself that she becomes the very thing he will regret losing when it is too late. Men are raised in a culture that teaches them to hunger for achievement, for conquest, for recognition. From the earliest days of boyhood, He learns that to show vulnerability is dangerous, that to admit longing is to risk humiliation. So he builds an empire of silence within himself. He wears armor stitched with pride, discipline, and ambition. Yet behind the fortress walls of his ego lies the same unyielding truth. He yearns for a place where he can set that armor down. CarlJung called this the confrontation with the anima, the feminine within every man that he tries to exile, but that never stops calling to him. It appears in his dreams, in his fantasies, in the inexplicable pull he feels towards certain women. What he cannot say, even to himself, is that he longs for a connection that penetrates deeper than physical desire. He craves to be disarmed, not by force, but by the quiet power of feminine presence. This is why men are often drawn to women who embody mystery, silence, and depth, not because they wish to control her, but because something in her calls out to the hidden, abandoned parts of themselves. But here lies the torment. The very thing he craves is the very thing he fears. To be seen is to be exposed. To surrender to feminine stillness feels to him like a small death, the death of his false self. The ego trembles at this threshold, whispering that he will lose power if he admits his longing. So instead, he buries it in detachment, in bravado, in distractions of conquest. Yet the shadow knows. His body remembers. And in quiet moments, when no one is watching, he feels the ache of a hunger he cannot feed. Women often misread this silence. They think he doesn't care, or that his indifference means lack of feeling. But in truth, indifference is his disguise. He cannot admit his need, because to do so would make him vulnerable to rejection. So he hides behind detachment. And yet, when a woman responds with her own silence, not from games, but from self-possession, it unnerves him, because her silence mirrors his inner void. Her detachment reveals his dependency. Suddenly, the man who appeared unshakable begins to feel the tremors of obsession. There is a paradox woven through this dynamic. The woman who bends herself to please him never awakens his soul. She feeds his ego, yes, but not his hunger. The woman who holds her ground, who refuses to shrink, who embodies her own mystery without chasing him, she becomes the sanctuary he secretly longs for. She is not a safe harbor because she gives him comfort, but because she forces him to confront himself. And though he may resist, though he may rage, though he may walk away, she leaves an imprint he cannot erase. This is why Jung spoke of individuation, the painful process of confronting one's shadow and integrating what has been denied. A man who resists this process will always remain restless, always chasing, never satisfied. But when a woman embodies her wholeness, she becomes the archetypal mirror of what he must face. She does not heal him by fixing him. She awakens him by standing fully in her own being. Think about it. Why does silence from a woman often provoke such intensity in a man? Why does her refusal to engage, her willingness to walk away, haunt him more than all the words she could ever speak? Because silence forces him into confrontation with his own emptiness. It dismantles the illusion that he was the one in control. It makes him feel, perhaps for the first time, the depth of his craving. And yet most men will never admit this. They will deny it with words, even as their actions betray them. They will insist they want freedom, control, admiration. But underneath, what they truly seek is resonance, to be reflected in a feminine presence that is not lost in his orbit, but firmly grounded in her own. A presence that does not demand, but simply is, radiant, still, untouchable. That is what haunts him, what binds him, what he cannot name, but will never forget. For the secret is this: what men crave is not ownership of the feminine, but initiation by her. Not submission, but revelation. And that is why the woman who knows herself holds the most dangerous kind of power, not because she tries to control, but because she does not. There is a certain cruelty in the way desire works. What men crave in secret is not sweetness, nor constant affirmation, but the one thing that terrifies them most: to be undone. His soul hungers for a woman who does not collapse into his will, but who stands before him as her own world, her gaze unflinching, her silence unyielding, her mystery impenetrable. In her presence, he feels both diminished and exalted, torn between fleeing and surrendering. And yet, though he may never put it into words, he yearns for that confrontation, because it is only there that he feels alive. Carl Jung once wrote that, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." A man secretly longs to be transformed, but he cannot confess this without stripping away the mask he has lived behind for years. He cannot say, "I want you to break me open." Instead, he speaks in coded gestures, in reckless pursuits, in restless attention that hides behind indifference. But every time he encounters a woman who embodies her wholeness, something inside him stirs. His ego panics, but his soul leans closer. Men are not afraid of women who demand. They are afraid of women who require nothing. The one who asks for nothing, who does not chase, who does not seek to soothe his ego, this is the one who pierces him. For in her detachment, she signals that she cannot be consumed, cannot be possessed, cannot be reduced to a reflection of his pride. And though his conscious mind may resist, his unconscious knows. This is the fire that burns him clean. Have you noticed how some men return again and again to the woman they once dismissed? Why the memory of her lingers like a ghost? Why her absence cuts deeper than her presence ever did? It is because she carried something they could not grasp, a depth that unsettled their illusions. While others tried to please him, she remained unbent, and in that strength, he glimpsed the sacred wound within himself. He might have run, he might have denied, but his craving for her presence never fully died. In this, men are more fragile than they will ever admit. Their power, their bravado, their conquests, all of it is scaffolding, built to cover a hunger they do not dare to name. They want to be seen not as heroes, but as human. They want to be known in the places they have hidden, the dark and trembling corridors of their psyche. Yet their pride cannot let them say it. So they posture, they distance, they pretend. But in the deep chambers of their unconscious, the anima whispers. This is why relationships that awaken the shadow are often tumultuous, filled with conflict, passion, and silence. The woman who embodies her depth becomes not merely a partner, but an initiator. She does not soothe his ego, but exposes it. She does not play the game of validation, and for this, he both resents and desires her. He will never tell her this, for to admit it would be to hand her the very power he fears. But she feels it in the way he lingers, in the way he returns, in the way he cannot let her go, even when he pretends he has. The paradox is that the more she holds to her wholeness, the more he is pulled into his own shadow. Her silence reveals his noise. Her depth reveals his restlessness. Her refusal to beg for his attention reveals how desperately he needs hers. And though he may fight it, deny it, or mask it with bravado, the craving remains. The craving for the one thing he cannot demand, cannot buy, cannot conquer, a woman who chooses but never chases. This is the spiritual danger and the spiritual gift of the feminine. To the man who has not yet faced himself, it feels like destruction. To the man who dares to step into his own shadow, it becomes the beginning of transformation. And though he may never admit it, what he craves most is not possession, but this transformation. Painful, terrifying, liberating. A man will never confess it, but the feminine he craves is not always tender, not always safe. It is the feminine that unsettles him, the feminine that strips away the illusions he has carefully built. What he seeks, but cannot put into words, is initiation. The woman who embodies her silence and sovereignty becomes the mirror in which his fragile ego cracks. He cannot articulate this desire, because to admit it is to surrender his crown. Yet in secret, his hunger is for a queen, not a servant. Jung understood this when he spoke of the anima, the eternal feminine within the male unconscious. Every man carries within him an image of woman, but when he encounters her embodied in life, he is shaken. She awakens in him the longing for wholeness, the ache to touch parts of himself he has denied. This is why he is obsessed with the woman who does not yield. He may dismiss her, avoid her, even resent her, but he cannot escape the pull. She is the gateway into himself, and though he fears the threshold, he is drawn toward it like a moth to flame. To you, as a woman, this may feel both strange and familiar. You may have wondered why men linger after you have withdrawn, why their desire seems to deepen, not when you pour yourself into them, but when you pull back into your own world. The truth is that men unconsciously equate feminine self-possession with divinity. To stand sovereign in yourself is to remind him of what he has lost, the connection to his soul. And though he cannot admit it, he craves your detachment because it awakens in him a longing for his own integration. This is why the most unforgettable women in a man's life are not always the most beautiful, nor the most accommodating, but the most complete. The woman who knows her worth does not orbit around a man. She moves within her own constellation. To him, she is terrifying. To him, she is intoxicating. She is both the danger and the salvation he cannot confess he wants. And it is in her presence that his mask begins to tremble. Yet, this craving is dangerous. Many men destroy what they most desire because they cannot tolerate the loss of control it demands. He may try to dominate her, diminish her, or reduce her to something manageable. He may accuse her of being cold, distant, or unfeeling. But underneath his protests is the very thing he cannot say aloud. I want you to see me in ways I cannot even see myself. He fears her because she can. He resents her because she does. And yet, he returns, again and again, because her presence is the closest he has ever come to truth. Philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius spoke of detachment, of freedom from the chains of desire and ego. But few understand that it is often through the encounter with the feminine that a man is first invited to this freedom. When a woman refuses to be controlled, she unwittingly becomes his stoic teacher. She forces him to confront what he cannot own, to see that no conquest, no validation, no fleeting praise will ever quiet the storm within him. Only by turning inward can he find peace. And so the paradox deepens. The woman he secretly craves is not the one who feeds his ego, but the one who starves it. She withdraws, she refuses, she remains unshaken. Her silence is his torment, but also his initiation. In this, she is both goddess and mirror, both wound and cure. He will not thank her, he will not admit it. But the hunger remains, written in his restless eyes, in his unfinished thoughts, in his inability to let go of the memory of her presence. For the woman, this truth is liberation. She no longer needs to bend, to overgive, to contort herself into what he demands. She realizes that her very wholeness is the thing he craves most. Not because it pleases him, but because it forces him to awaken. And in that realization, she steps out of the role of servant and into the archetype of queen, priestess, sovereign of her own soul. There comes a moment when a woman realizes the secret craving of men is not hers to fulfill, not hers to carry, not hers to answer. For years, perhaps, she believed love meant bending, pleasing, or sacrificing. But Jung's vision reveals otherwise. A man, a silent hunger, is not for her body alone, not even for her affection. It is for her light. He wants her to be the lantern he can hold, while he remains in shadow. Yet she is not born to dim. When she withdraws into herself, when she learns the art of detachment, she does not abandon him, she liberates herself. She embodies the wisdom of Epictetus, who wrote that no person is free who is enslaved to another's opinion. Her sovereignty unsettles him because it forces him to see the prison of his own ego. He cannot name this truth, but he feels it. He may lash out, accuse, or retreat. Yet in the silence she offers him, something stirs. He begins to notice the walls he has built around his own heart. He begins to recognize the ways he has sought mothering instead of love, validation instead of connection. What he secretly craves, but cannot admit, is the woman who does not collapse into him. He yearns for the one who refuses to lose herself in his storms. He aches for the one who is tender, yet untouchable, compassionate, yet unmoved, near yet infinitely far. To stand before her is to feel both desire and despair, because her presence whispers, "If you want me, meet me where I am free." This is the impossible demand he cannot speak aloud. And so she becomes, without trying, the threshold to his individuation. If he is courageous, he will face the shadow she awakens in him. If he is not, he will run from her light, only to encounter it again and again in the women who follow. For every man, in his secret depths, knows the truth. What he desires most is the woman who does not need him. The paradox is cruel. His ego longs to be central, yet his soul aches to be challenged, undone, reborn. And she, simply by living in her wholeness, forces the confrontation he avoids. To you, the woman listening, this is your freedom. You are not required to play the role of healer, savior, or sacrifice. You are not required to teach him what he refuses to learn. Your only task is to remember that your worth is not negotiable. You were not made to orbit around a man's fragile image of himself. You were made to be whole, radiant, sovereign. When you embody this, you become unforgettable, not because you chase, but because you choose. In the end, the man who fears your silence reveals his truth. He is still a boy clinging to the illusion of control. But the man who can sit with your detachment, who can face the discomfort it awakens, is the one who inches closer to his own soul. You are not his mirror, not his mother, not his possession. You are the reminder that true love is not born in dependency, but in freedom, not in clinging, but in choosing. And here lies the final revelation. What men secretly crave, but will never admit, is the woman who embodies her own completeness. Not because she fills his emptiness, but because she refuses to. Not because she validates him, but because she challenges him to validate himself. She awakens him not with words, but with her silence. She transforms him not by staying, but by being willing to walk away. This is the feminine mystery Jung spoke of, the spiritual power hidden in every woman who dares to know herself. It is dangerous, it is intoxicating, and it is the very thing he cannot confess he desires most. But you, the woman who knows, no longer bend to his silence. You stand in your own. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.